I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. How does a brand move from being a commodity to being a community? Scott Woodward joins the show to discuss why kindness is no longer a soft marketing line, but a high-leverage strategic advantage that drives everything from customer acquisition to 76% higher employee engagement. My interview with Scott is coming right up, but first. Scott Woodward, welcome to On Brand.
Nick, thank you very much for having me this morning. I appreciate it.
So you've had an incredible run with legacy brands like Ray-Ban, Coca-Cola. Looking back, what was the core story that kept those icons relevant across so many decades?
Well, I think particularly with Ray-Ban, that's very near and dear to my heart because that was very early on in my career. And it's such a heritage, iconic, prior to the acquisition by Luxottica, American brand that I used to liken to Levi's in its magnitude, if you will. It just has such an incredible, rich history. The fashion history of it, the placement in iconic movies like Top Gun and Risky Business, with Tom Cruise being such a huge part of the development and expansion of Ray-Ban with consumers around the world. It has a feeling, an emotion equivalent to Levi's. It's such an American icon. So Ray-Ban was an extraordinarily fun brand to work on early in my career.
Well, you say close to your heart. It's close to my heart and also close to my head. I've been wearing Ray-Ban glasses for a long time.
I noticed that in watching some of your prior podcasts that you sport Ray-Ban prescription glasses. And that actually was one of my early assignments at Ray-Ban. We looked at how to integrate the sunglass and the prescription business to be more unified. So it's interesting you bring that point up. The very first campaign I did to do that was with Sylvester Stallone's now wife, Jennifer Flavin. She was the face of our prescription brand many decades ago, which very few people know.
That's really interesting. I guess for, spending like nearly 24/7 in Ray-Bans, to me, they are such a so tied to prescription glasses. But that's a good reminder, especially back to the Top Gun of it all, that was not always the case. A pretty big pivot from that brand as well.
Yes, Ray-Ban's history was interesting in that it began with the United States government asking Bausch & Lomb, the prior owner, to make an anti-glare sunglass for World War II pilots, for General MacArthur and the military. So its background is really interesting. So that's how it began, with the classic aviator that we all know. And then one of the other SKUs that was very well known is called the Wayfarer. And that, of course, was made famous by Tom Cruise in Risky Business. It was on the cusp of being discontinued, actually. And it was a very low-selling SKU. And it was placed in the movie Risky Business on Tom in that famous underwear scene. And it exploded. And very few people know that Ray-Ban was a brand really built on product placement and integration. So not so much a highly advertised brand in what was, traditional print and television mediums, but it was really made very famous by some key movie product placements. The third one of which would be, the first one I would say would be Top Gun, and then Risky Business with the Wayfarer. And then when I was there running global marketing, we did the integration with Men in Black
Yeah.
and Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones with Sony, and took it to another level and did an integrated uh, television campaign around it, where for the first time we used the film footage from the movie, got the actors to agree and the studio to agree that it would be a great addition and additive marketing element to run a trailer that featured Ray-Ban, given the sunglasses played a role and was part of the uniform of both actors. So it was an incredibly interesting trifecta in Ray-Ban's long and storied integration history with product placement and major movie stars.
I think that's such a great example, and really the kind of connection between the core brand story and how it's remained, or at least for that window of time, a part of the culture through some of those, like you said, not a heavily advertised brand, but because of these key placements in pop culture moments, it became, like you said, sort of an American touchstone, like Levi's jeans or Coca Cola.
It really has, and a lot of people are surprised when I bring up the fact of the marketing mix of Ray-Ban and what we did and the secret sauce and the things that were successful and not. And it was during a really interesting period because Oakley was launched. And that was an incredible phenomenon, the style of that sunglass and what was happening. And, Men in Black featuring the Cat's Predator, which was a new part of our sports line, and the wardrobe prop stylist for the film liking it, the actors Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones liking it, and the really interesting moment of a sunglass being part of the wardrobe, right? It wasn't just a cool factor of, Tom wearing them on the beach in Risky Business and in the cockpit and in the scene in the underwear in Risky Business. But this time around, it was a critical part of the story and the script. So it was really interesting. And I love that at that point, we chose to go one step further and not just let it as a passive placement, sort of as part of the cultural zeitgeist and what it became, but we actually used film footage. We were the first to do that. If you look at what James Bond has done over the years with BMW and Heineken and, what Wicked has recently done with Ariana Grande and the Wicked placement, we were the first to really use film footage and integrate it as part of it being a commercial and a movie trailer, which was really interesting.
Wow. And again, I'd say in terms of kind of the history of brand partnerships, it seems like that's an important point in the history, because now we see these, as you listed several, deep brand partnerships, but kind of tracking that back, there used to be more of a clear line between the church and state of brands and entertainment. Certainly, pairing those up, but that deep level of, like you said, film footage, and now we of course see even additional promotional footage, like the kind of James Bond almost mini movies that they've done with Heineken.
Absolutely. Integration's always been really interesting. It's been, uh, I've always described it as a subtle, subliminal form of advertising. It lives in a movie or a television show. And, a lot of people forget that even Armani was a pioneer in it with Richard Gere and the movie where he wore Armani throughout the suits and the ties. So product placement and integration has been subliminal and sort of a part of a consumer psyche in that they're absorbing the brand, whether it's a Coke on the table or James Bond and Daniel Craig driving a BMW or sipping a Heineken at the bar. But now cleverly brands are integrating it more. I think after what we did with the sunglasses being in Men in Black and doing an overt trailer with the product and to promote the movie, that it's much more top of mind now and a little less subliminal than it used to be. But it's a great way to augment advertising, outdoor, and to your point, a lot of brands are doing collaborations now. They go right to the celebrity and do collaborations like Pharrell has done with Adidas, or most recently Ray-Ban has done with Rocky ASAP, and so a lot of brands are doing collaborations now with celebrities, and it's much more overt, and the partnership is front and center.
On Brand will be right back after this. Now, back to the show. So we talked about Ray-Ban's pivot. You eventually pivoted from these corporate powerhouses to found SEW Branded. Was there a specific moment or realization that made you want to move into the entrepreneurial space?
That's a good question. Yes, I was really lucky in the first part of my career after a couple of years in a training program for Chevron out of graduate school. And then I got very lucky and landed at Ray-Ban, went on to Calvin Klein, one of the preeminent fashion brands, and worked during the last couple of years of Calvin Klein being at the brand itself, which was an incredible experience, and then went on to Movado. And when a CMO role did not materialize that I had landed, I thought very strongly about doing my own branding firm. I had been mentored by some of the black belts in branding and public relations, Mike Toth, who helped Tommy Hilfiger reinvent the Tommy Hilfiger brand, if you recall, years ago, with that twist on that American classic and icon. Peter Arnell, who was a mentor in our agency during my Ray-Ban days and on some work at Movado, and Sam Shahid, who helmed the Abercrombie and Fitch transformation years ago with that iconic imagery. I thought it could be really interesting to work with many brands rather than helm one singular brand. And also, while I was at Movado, I oversaw 10 watch brands, and I liked having the interesting opportunity to work on many positionings, many different brands. And so that also fueled trying to perhaps have my own boutique and work on a multitude of brands. And it's been very fun and rewarding.
So I could, as I have kind of evidenced in my questions here, I love talking. I'm a big brand nerd about, histories of brands and partnerships. But what really got my attention are the dots that you've connected between kindness and brand strategy. And that was a lens that I have not thought a lot about. And I'm fascinated to see where this focus came from.
Very good question. A lot of people ask me early on how I came to do the collaboration with Lady Gaga's newly launched Born This Way Foundation and with a client at the time, Office Depot, the national retailer for office supplies that competes with Staples and competed with Office Max before its acquisition. And now, of course, with Amazon and Kmart and online retailers for office supplies and back to school supplies. They were a new client. I knew the chief marketing officer very well because we had worked together at Ray-Ban. And the former CEO of the NFL, Neil Austrian, was the CEO of the brand. And my brief was very simple. They arrived at Office Depot and the consumer's age was quite high. And they really wanted to begin a dialogue with youth and students. And his daughter at the time was a student. And I think personally and professionally, they looked at the numbers of their of the age demographic of their consumer, and they wanted to bring that down, as many brands do today, right? Everything is about Gen Z and Alpha generation, and at that time, millennials. And so we were hired to look at what that might look like to begin a dialogue and speak with the youth market. So after a few months of immersion, one of the things that we uncovered was anti-bullying and what was happening in schools with regard to parents, teachers, and students or youth. And that was really problematic. How students treated each other, the dynamic in school, the fact that school can be one of the most unkind places at times. If we look back and really want to be honest, most of us can say, oh, I remember a period where I was bullied or I witnessed being bullied. So we began to think about how to amp up and dialogue about kindness in schools. And I had watched on Oprah, Lady Gaga and her mother Cynthia launch Born This Way Foundation on Oprah years ago. And I remember as a marketer thinking, that is really a positive, amazing thing that they've done. How might I find a way to work with a brand and this organization? And that was the genesis of it. And I happened to know her manager, called him up and pitched the idea of, having an audience with Office Depot of, an entire nation of students, their parents and teachers, and how we could begin a dialogue with them on being kind in schools. And at first it wasn't intuitive to him. He sort of said, well, Lady Gaga is so much about fashion. And she, her first brand collaboration was with Barney's, the very famous retailer that, was so luxurious and high fashion. But as we began to talk to her mother and eventually Lady Gaga and her team, we thought, wow, this is a really unique opportunity to establish a dialogue with parents, teachers, and youth. And that's how it began.
Well, and it really has blossomed from there too, looking at kindness connected to brands. You've got research showing that 61% of consumers have refused to buy from a brand they consider unkind. And I think that there's really something to that, especially in an increasingly automated, AI-driven marketplace. People are looking for kindness and humanity in their brands. And I'm afraid with everything that's happening, it's easy for brands to skip right over that.
Nick, that's a really, really interesting insight and point. And it's interesting what we did. It's been 13 or 14 years ago since we did that program with Lady Gaga. It was really successful. I remember exploring who we were going to get to be the influencers for it. I really loved Patrick Schwarzenegger, who at the time was Maria and Arnold's son. He was an early influencer who I felt had a kindness practice. And we asked him as a teenager in high school if he would do it. His parents supported it, and he was our influencer for that program. Fast forward all these years later, now he's a very well-known movie star after his breakout role in White Lotus and some other projects. So I'm really proud of that selection and partnership. And then a year later, we did it with One Direction, which was at the height of their fame. And to your point, fast forwarding all these years, I'm really proud of the fact that it began as a dialogue in schools across the country, right? We enlisted one of the most famous educators in that space, Brooke Gibbs, and we went into 2,000 schools across America to talk about kindness, anti-bullying, the golden rule, being nicer to each other. So I think that halo began with Office Depot around our research and insights in how to talk to youth. And to your point, it has caught fire, right? It has moved into the sports world. It's moved into brands. It's moved into Scott Galloway, and his discussion on young men and the book that he just authored, and young men developing a kindness practice as part of what the pandemic did to, that cohort of young men and, the things that are going on with them. And brands are finding through research and the statistics that you identified that consumers do like brands that have a kindness element associated with them. It's an attribute that all these years later, after the pandemic, with AI and the automation of brands, that consumers are assigning importance to as they choose brands, and the millions of brands available to them in their choices. Also, I think with Gen Z today, social impact marketing is important, right? We can spout off and name many brands that have had causes aligned with them. Ralph Lauren and breast cancer, Patagonia and saving the environment, Tom's and donating a pair of shoes for every one purchased. What Patrick Schwarzenegger and his mother, Maria, are doing now with MOSH and brain health and Alzheimer's based on her personal experience with her father, Sergeant Shriver. So I think it is a merging of social impact marketing and what's important to the youth culture today. And kindness has resonated over a decade, I think, with what we did in schools a year ago, now even expanding to the NFL with what they did last year with the Super Bowl and Darman and Tim Ellis, the CMO there, recognizing the importance of kindness and that clever campaign to be kind to your opponent. So it's really caught fire the last decade.
Well, it really has, and in spaces that you might not traditionally expect to see kindness, like the NFL, for example. And we've talked about throughout this episode your career and your career as a creative. And you note that internal kindness boosts creativity by 60%. And I just wonder, as we begin to wrap up, it really seems like the brand of kindness itself, that you are really about moving that from what might be perceived as a weakness or softer to something that is actually a core strength for a leader, for a brand.
That's a great way to put a bow on the discussion, if you will, because you nailed it. A lot of people over a period of time, because of generational cohorts and how things were versus how they are today, with an emphasis on youth, I think the perception was kindness was perhaps a weakness. And we're pivoting now to really, over the last decade, leaders are beginning to attribute kindness practices to being a strength. I think we manage people differently now in how we manage organizations, how we manage people within brands. And all these years later, I happened to meet a former Mrs. Universe and at a film festival here in New York, Luisa Diaz, who runs the Luisa Diaz Foundation. We met at a film festival, began to speak about our histories in kindness. And one of the things that she's been working on is positioning kindness as a strength. So our third trifecta in this space was a kindness PSA that we did a year ago with New York icons. And the theme of that was how kindness is really a strength and not a weakness, and how it really changes the dynamic of, your happiness level, your nutrition, all of the personal things and professional things that you enjoy by developing and thinking about a kindness practice as part of your job, perhaps, managing a large group or an organization, or within your family, or within your community, or within your schools that your children go to. Because, as Harry Styles said in my PSA all those years ago, right? It costs nothing to be kind. And, it's really an attribute that I think is a positive if you think about it and you make it part of your daily practice. And as you mentioned, as brands look at measurements and doing research around it, it really is a benefit as part of a brand's marketing mix. I was delighted to see what the NFL did and what Tim Ellis did, an incredibly brilliant CMO. I thought that was really clever, bringing that whole dialogue into the NFL, which you never really would have expected.
Well, speaking of putting bows on conversations, that is what I do. And it is now my opportunity to get to ask you, Scott, for a brand that has made you smile recently.
Since we've talked a lot about kindness, and I mentioned the NFL, I'll go back to a heritage brand. I really love what Burberry is doing lately with the actor Tom Blythe and their new campaign. That is an incredible heritage brand. We began the conversation with Ray-Ban, also, an American heritage brand. Burberry being British. I think what they've done, I'll take it back to my fashion roots, with celebrating the trench coat, being a very product-driven company like Ray-Ban was with Aviator and Wayfarer. I really love their campaign that they've done recently, celebrating the trench and incorporating the young British actor Tom Blythe. I thought it's been really brilliantly done, given they are an incredible 360-degree digitally savvy brand in the fashion landscape. So that's made me smile.
Well said. So where can we send folks to learn more about who you are and what you do?
I've got a personal website, scottwoodward.com, and our brand marketing consultancy advertising agency website is So Branded, which are my initials, SEW.
Yes, not SO branded.
Correct. It was a play on completely holistically branded. So, and they happen to be my initials. So SEWBRANDED.com, sobranded.com.
Awesome. And we will link up to all of that in our show notes, which folks can find at onbrandpodcast.com. Scott Woodward. Scott Woodward, thank you for being on brand with us.
Thank you so much for the conversation. I really appreciate it.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.